Bishop Paul. In listening to your evidence this morning, it just took me back to a quote that I recalled from Dame Whina Cooper, where she talked about children, and the quote was, take care of our children, take care of what they hear, take care of what they see, take care of what they feel. For how children grow, so will be the shape of Aotearoa. And we've seen the impacts of the survivors and sometimes they've been referred to as victims from Maryland and from Hebron Trust and also from the orphanage, St. Joseph's Orphanage. My question really comes back to, again, it's the authority of the bishop and it's the perception and the reality. So thank you for the evidence that's already been provided. But I wanted to ask you really around what the picture is that we're coming to see is that the bishop is this all-over authority in his diocese, and I think your canon law actually supports that. But in your diocese, you can have a number of different religious congregations that can come in, and so there's a courtesy, there's a civility that they're supposed to be in contact with the bishop. And then there's an expectation that the bishop will be across their business. What I'm really asking is, in this situation, it's still very grey how much the bishop is actually across the business of all of the different religious congregations or congregations actually within their diocese, and whether or not, in your view, now as the bishop, that should actually be strengthened. Because we've seen what happens when it's not, and I think we've been hearing that in evidence throughout this week and previously as well. Can you comment on that?
I can. I think the perception that the bishop has authority over the diocese in a sort of in a global sense, and in quite particular areas of which he has authority. On a day-to-day basis, the running and the life of the diocese, there's too much going on for a bishop to be able to have that, and actually to necessarily want to have that. So, especially in the past, I think I alluded earlier, there would be a bishop and he would have a priest who might be a secretary, and there might be a secretary for education, and that was the whole of the. So it was very much that religious orders, they had a whole structure and a system, and that they were doing the work, and that the bishop, as sort of set it up, as I alluded to, and so the idea of that he had his finger, or not fingers in all, but that's the wrong expect, but that he had oversight of it all is not quite. It wasn't the reality, and it wasn't really the expectation either from the bishop.
Which would be a different expectation from the people, the Catholic community.
People think that the bishop has, but in fact you can't do that, and so parishes have a whole lot of canon law around autonomy for them. So a lot of it is actually it's about dialogue and goodwill and talking and connection, and you only go to the authority line if it really has to go there. If there's it gets to a point where you say, well, actually, under the Code of Canon Law, this is, you have to do this. But normally you talk and so it's much less authoritarian than it's perceived under canon law. That's sort of like when you get to the crunch point then.
So we can understand the operational aspect of it. Parishes run their own churches, or their and congregations do the same. And it's really the governance component that I'm asking about here is, so when you've got an order like the St. John of God coming into New Zealand wanting to set up a specific school for a specific purpose in line with their charism, when you're coming into a context like a nation like Aotearoa, and we have we've got an Indigenous population here, but there's no connect with really, the socio-political context of our nation. There's no mention of te tiriti, there's no mention of being able to take, in a cultural lens. Education is a culture as well, but in this case, a specific ethnic lens over what's happening. But neither is the bishop or the wider structure actually interested in taking that lens.
I think we're looking at it very much from a 2021 point of view, and you're quite right. In 1955, those were not it was not the way that it was looked at, and my hope would be, if this was happening now, if a religious order was to come in, then in part, certainly if we have individuals from other countries coming to work here, we go through a process with them of trying to orient them, spend time living with others, learning about our country, all of those things. But certainly in the past, it was as you said, and it was not a focus. And
Sure. And putting that aside, te tiriti's been with us since 1840.
Sure.
So this happened, like literally half a century later, in the 1950s. But I want to come back to this point about, so in your view, as a bishop, whether or not it should actually be written into canon law. Right. That there should, that there should be this greater oversight, because what I'm hearing is that there is still so many, I was going to say gaps or loose ends, where there's so much room for discretion and discernment, and it hasn't always occurred. So if you talk about how does the church get better, how can the bishop's role, because what you intend to happen and what actually your Catholic population perceive are two very different things.
I'd be much more confident now that we have much better structures for the oversight of works that we are still doing. But as I said earlier, we don't have institutions like Maryland's running anymore. Within our school system, we have a Catholic Education Office, for example, that liaises with all our schools, and then the schools sit under the government for integration and all the requirements there. So that within our parishes, we've certainly developed safeguarding structures and expectations for parishes around what that looks like, and that's audited, and we have a safeguarding officer who goes around and works with our parishes to see that they are putting in place and that that's being followed through. And we are trying to work at educating our people about the very things you're talking, the role of the treaty. How are we working with our Indigenous people from other cultures, of which Catholic community now is made up of a significant number of cultures. So I am, and any new works that are set up now are much more prescribed in terms of what's expected. The reporting report, if an order was to come in and do something like expected, we wouldn't be just leaving it to them in the way that happened in the past.
And just going back to the period in question here, with the school, what about the sense for the different religious congregations of actually just doing what's right? So you've got your different, the vows.
Different charisms.
Different charisms, but just doing what's tika, what's pono, what's right in terms of there's abuse. So I'm really asking about the role of common law here, right, and the law of the land, and why the church, I see there's a very strong drive to be able to comply with your canon law, which isn't always achieved. But there seems to be quite a disconnect, actually, with even understanding the rights of these children and young people and the role of the law of the land. Common law, going to the police, doing what actually would be right in those instances.
I mean, I wasn't alive in 1955, so I really...
Appreciate that.
so, and that...
It's but really the training, you know, of the brothers, of the different congregations.
Look, I really can't comment on that in terms of it's not my, I mean, it's not in my experience. I guess the only thing I can say is that wasn't how it was seen, and that's not right, as we know now, but I think that's a developing understanding of all people in Aotearoa New Zealand, and we see it in all institutions, and the church was lacking in that area along with the state and everyone else, I think.
No further questions. Thank you, Bishop.
My colleague has basically covered everything that I wanted to, but I just want to make that last point. I want to just to develop it very, very briefly. You said that, and my colleague has said, doing the right thing, because it strikes me that listening here from the point of view, not as a lawyer, not as a judge, not as a canonical expert, but as a human being, it is about what was right to do, what was ethical to do, the higher questions, the ones which one would hope that all churches would follow, even before the law and apart from the law. So here we have evil being done in a society. Evil known to the church as a whole. Whether it's a priesthood, whether it's a religious, whether it's a congregation, it is known more or less. It was never right, was it, to cover this up?
No.
No. It was never the standard of the time to cover it up, to ignore it, was it?
No.
It was always the responsibility of the bishop and every other religious person who knew about this to do something, wasn't it?
It was.
Yeah. And that wasn't done. The right thing wasn't done, was it?
Not all the time.
No. I mean, for decades, the bishops of Christchurch knew that things were going on, that things weren't right. Could you, and I know this is hindsight and trying to rebuild the past and that you weren't there, but do you think, actually, standing back, if a person who held a strong position, who said this was evil, this was wrong, these people must go, do you think that in spite of all the laws, that could really have been done? If somebody had stood up courageously?
Do you mean these people, as in the brothers?
This order. The order should go.
Yeah. I mean, again, the context, all of those things, all of what you say is true, and you know why people in society, the church, the state, everyone, why we didn't stand up and say that families, you know, our families that covered those things as well.
Yes.
I think that was the culture of the time, and it's wrong. Yeah. And we've heard the results and the fruits of that, and what it's, and so that's part of the shame that we carry for our ancestors, our forebears, and the things that they've done. And all I can say is that we're trying really hard and want to continue to. I'm going to be a bishop for the next 20 years to see that people are safe, that they're cared for, and that the wrongs that have happened in the past, that we can help people as much as we can to be able to live the rest of their lives carrying that damage that was done, but trying to know that they will be safe in the future and our children will be safe.
And just to follow that point, and again shortly, it's so obvious to us all, isn't it, that the abuse happened so long ago but still lives in those who are fortunate enough to be alive. So the pain is still hurt. Do you see that survivors in particular want the Catholic Church as a whole to be responsible for this in terms of the healing, the recompense, the redress for them. Do you understand that?
I do understand that.
Yes.
Yes.
And that they are not concerned with the niceties of whether this is a religious or a diocese, whether it's a bishop or a provincial.
Sure.
They want to be healed.
I understand that.
Yeah. And do you think the Catholic Church of New Zealand is prepared to step up and do its part towards that?
Well, I hope so, and that this is why we asked to be part of this.
Yes.
So I think that's and we knew that in doing that we were coming with all our history and our past. So as a bishop and as one for the future, I'm saying yes.
Thank you. Thank you for that. And thank you for providing your evidence, for coming along and for making yourself available for questioning. It is much appreciated. It's important that everybody has that you have an opportunity as the church to explain the position, and that survivors have an opportunity to see you doing that. And we are grateful that you have done that for us today. We will take the